Did you know you can shrink a stamp and use watercolor paints with your stamp nails? What's up, nail crew? It's Nicole, your fellow nail obsessed DIYer. I have been itching to get my watercolors back out and do some more watercolor stamping. So I also want to show you how easy it is to shrink a stamped image. The image that I wanted to use is a sunflower, but it was a little too big to fit the whole thing in my nail. So I thought, oh my gosh, this is perfect. I haven't done a shrunk stamp in a while, and I can show you how to do watercolor. Now, when you're doing watercolor on your nails, I found that it shows up best when you do a light color as your base. So I decided to do white as my base. It's a beautiful white called Don't Go from OG Dip Powder, and it's not super stark. So I feel like it just gives you a beautiful white base that's not like bam, super stark white. The other two colors that I'm using for the mani are called Dancing Queen. It's a gorgeous darker mauve pink type color. And then the other one I'm using is my absolute favorite mustard yellow type color for the fall. It's called I Don't Speak Dipshit, which I love the name. If you watch Yellowstone, then you know what that's from. I have been wanting to do like a really pretty fall like combination color mani and use some sunflowers. So this was like a perfect fit for just having something to be like transitioning still into fall. I went in with my white first and did the two dips of that. And then I did my two dips of I Don't Speak Dipshit. Oh, all the products that I'm using in the video, I will make sure that I link in the description. I do that every video and I often forget to say that, but if you're ever looking for something, it is in the description. And if I forget, just drop me a comment. I'm super forgetful, but I am happy to let you know whatever I'm using. So something that I don't have to do since I have builder gel down on my natural nails is I don't have to worry about building an apex with the dip powder. I use builder gel as a base pretty much all the time on my natural nails. Every once in a while, when they're short, I'll use clear dip powder. But for the most part, for the past 4 years, I've been doing builder gel down as my base or rubber base once in a while. Rubber base gel, I like that too. Builder gel is just my go-to, especially once my nails get long. So when they're short, it's either rubber base or clear dip powder. But when they start to get longer, I have to use builder gel because I am a very sloppy, messy person. I'm accident prone. Like if there's a way for me to smash my hand into something, I'm probably gonna do it. So I like to use builder gel when my nails are long just to keep them extra protected. I went through each color and did the two layers. Since I have that builder gel base down, I have my apex built with the builder gel. So I'm able to just do the two colors of my dip. And I do this whether I'm using a solid, a shimmer, a flake, or a foil, or a glitter. I only have to do two layers since that builder gel gives me a nice apex. Something that when you're using solid colors that you want to be really aware of, and I didn't do this on my thumb, and I wanted to make sure I pointed it out. So when you're applying your dip base down for solid colors, especially, like you always want to keep the dip base really thin. But something else that I wasn't paying attention to on my thumb that's really important is that you want to keep your dip base really even. So when I go through my thumb, you can see it a little bit on the first layer and then really on the second layer. I did too many passes of the dip base brush and not very evenly. So when I start to pour over the powder of the Dancing Queen on my thumb, you can see like there's almost like this little lump in the center. It's because that's where some of the dip base pulled. Now, if you're using a shimmer or a flake or a foil or a glitter, it's not as obvious, but when you're doing a solid color, it's really obvious. So when I realized that I was like, oh, dang it. Like I just wasn't paying attention enough. I was way more careful on my other nails, but not my thumb. And this is another reason why I like to use clear dip powder as my last layer. So what the clear dip powder does, not just for your glitters, your flakes, and your foils, but also for your solids and your shimmers, it encapsulates the powder. And when you go to buff and shape, you can get this really nice, beautiful buffed nail, and you didn't over buff into your actual color dip powder. So this was one of those times where it's, to me, super important that I use clear as my last layer. This way I could buff my nail really smooth. And once I buffed my nail once my mani was all done and I looked at it, you couldn't even tell that I accidentally, had put too much base on because the clear kind of filled everything in so that when I buffed, it looked really nice and smooth. Once you finish with all of your dip nails, then like I said, go through, you do your clear as your last base, as your last layer, and then brush off the excess. That I do every single layer, no matter what kind of powder I'm using. That helps you keep your dip nails from getting too thick, which it's so much better to have a higher number of thin layers than a lower number of thick layers. A lower number of thick layers typically leads to lifting, cracking, chipping, and those things. And after you spend so much time doing your nails, you don't want that to happen, right? Like we're aiming for that not to happen. Even though I change my nails often, everything that I talk about here is always to help everybody get the most long-lasting nails possible. And if you want your nails to last less, you can use peel base like I do in between your builder gel and your dip or on your natural nails. I don't know about you all, but there is something so satisfying about the buffing and the shaping and the filing of your dip nails after they've been activated. Like just getting them so nice and smooth and really like getting your cuticle lines nice and all that. Just there's something so satisfying to me about that. I do like to go around the sides of my nails and the back at my cuticle with some kind of e-file bit. I switch up the ones that I use. I busted out the one that I always used to use just to see if I was still good at it. And spoiler alert, I was not as good as I used to be at it, but that's okay. So we're going to jump into the stamping. And to shrink a stamp, you have to have an actual shrinking stamp. Now, I think there are other ways to do it, but I'm not trying to do it without a shrinking stamper. So you want to make sure that your stamper is pushed up as far as it can. You want your stamp to be like puffed out as much as you possibly can, because what you're going to do is you're going to untwist it. And then when you untwist it, that is how the stamp shrinks up. So I took this bigger sunflower and the jelly stamper was already twisted all the way up so the stamp is pushed out as much as possible. As soon as I picked up the stamped image, I immediately untwisted the stamper, the shrink stamper, so that the image would shrink back up. And shrinking it back down, then once I did that, I used some masking tape just to pull off any of the pieces of other images that got stuck on the stamp, and then immediately pressed it onto my nail. Now, the way that I do this, because I'm using watercolors, is I do it over my dip nails that have been activated, buffed super smooth, and then wiped with isopropyl alcohol. This gives your watercolor a nice background to stick to. I don't know if using some kind of like sticky base or anything would mess up the watercolors. I found for dip nails, it works really well to do it over a nail that's just been buffed super smooth after it's been activated. Then you can go in and you're going to want to play with the watercolor. So this is where the fun comes in. You need a cup or some kind of little bowl of water beside you. And then I'm just using the brush that came with the watercolor set. First, you have to get your brush wet, and you want to get your brush like to be able to move around. So I dunk it in the little bowl, then wipe it on the paper towel. Definitely you want some paper towels sitting there with you. And then I put some of that water from the brush into the color that I want to use. So you can kind of play around and see like what the color looks like, and is it going to be too dark or too light based on how much of the watercolor paint you put onto the brush. So let's say you put a little too much water on your brush and then you dip it into the watercolor and you're realizing like it's just not showing up very well on your nail. Well, that means you probably have too much water on the brush, or you put too much water into the actual watercolor paint, like the little color that you picked. So I sometimes do that, and then all you have to do is brush off some of the excess water from your brush onto the paper towel, put the brush into the watercolor you want to use, and get some of that liquid out so it's not so wet in there. Like you want it wet, but you don't want it soaking wet. For your nails, I don't know about watercolor painting. I've never tried to do watercolor painting. Well, probably when I was a kid, but not anytime recently. When you're doing it for nails, you want the pigment to be pretty there from the watercolor paint. So you want your brush to be wet but not soaked, basically damp, and then you want your actual watercolor to be damp but again not soaked in there, and that's how you get the color to pick up. So you don't have to do anything special with your stamped image. You literally just stamp it on, let it dry for like a minute or two, and then you can go in with your watercolors. Now, something that's so great about watercolor nails is that if you make a mistake, all you have to do is dip the brush into the water and wipe it off. So anytime you make mistakes, that's all you need to do. If you accidentally color outside of the lines of your stamped image, just take some water on your little watercolor brush and wipe it off. This is why I absolutely love watercolor with dip nails, with stamping. It is one of my favorite things to do. So I will definitely be doing more of that in the fall and winter. So that we don't smear our beautiful image that we just filled in with the watercolor, I like to let it dry for at least 5 minutes, up to 10, to really make sure that the watercolor is totally dry before I go in and do the smudge-free top. And the smudge-free top is an absolute must over top of the watercolor. I'm using Maniology smudge-free top coat. So once that's totally dry, then I can go in and do my dip liquids top coating like I normally would. And that is how I do all of my stamps now. I go in with the Maniology smudge-free top coat, let that dry for preferably about 10 minutes to make sure it is totally dry. It is not tacky whatsoever, because then you can do your dip top coating just like you normally would. Now, one thing I will say is you definitely don't want to press the activator brush into the smudge-free top coat super hard. Like, even though it's already totally dry, I've noticed that one time my brush kind of got stuck a little bit. So make sure that you just kind of float the activator over top for whatever nails you have the stamped image on. That will really help. If you try to do the activator directly over your stamped image, it's going to make it bleed. That's why some kind of smudge-free top coat is an absolute must. And then you can just use your dip liquids to top coat, which I love because the OG dip liquids are crazy, crazy shiny. Now that I got you wanting to bust out your stamping and your watercolors, join me in this next video and we'll do more watercolor nail stamping. Thanks for joining me today, Nail Crew.